Okay, so you want to own a private helicopter. A private helicopter can cost $1.5 million to buy, but that's not the expensive part. Fly it just 300 hours a year, and the real cost quietly climbs to almost $500,000 every single year. That's about $1,669 for every hour it's in the air, or nearly 3 times more expensive than simply chartering the exact same helicopter. And here's the strange part. Almost two-thirds of that money is spent even if the helicopter never leaves the ground. The engine keeps aging. The insurance bill still arrives. The hangar still needs paying. Every single day. Whether the rotor blades spin or not. So why do thousands of entrepreneurs, executives, and millionaires still buy them? Are they simply making terrible financial decisions? Or do they understand something everyone else doesn't? Because once you start digging through maintenance schedules, insurance data, and one of the biggest helicopter bankruptcies in American history, you discover something surprising. You're not really buying a helicopter. You're buying one of the most expensive fixed-cost businesses on Earth that just happens to fly. Let's start with the fantasy, because that's exactly what sells helicopters. It's Friday afternoon. The highway out of the city has already turned bright red on Google Maps. You don't care. You walk across the tarmac, unlock your helicopter, climb inside. The turbine begins to whistle behind you. The rotor slowly starts turning, then faster, until it becomes nothing more than a transparent blur above your head. Less than a minute later, you're climbing over thousands of cars that haven't moved more than a few hundred feet. 20 minutes later, you're landing beside your lake house, or your ranch, or your yacht. No airport terminals, no boarding passes, no waiting for someone else's schedule. And unlike most luxury advertising, this part is completely real. A helicopter genuinely delivers that experience every single time it flies. The problem is everything that happens after it lands. Because 6 months later, the helicopter might not have flown in weeks, yet the invoices never stop arriving. Insurance, hangar rent, maintenance reserves, loan payments, nothing has moved, nothing has flown. Yet thousands of dollars quietly leave your bank account every month anyway. A luxury car loses value because you drive it. A helicopter can become expensive simply because it exists. You think you're buying an aircraft, you're actually buying time. Every helicopter leaves the factory carrying dozens of invisible countdown clocks. Some count flight hours, others count calendar years. Some track engine cycles. And every one of those clocks starts ticking the day the helicopter enters service. Not the day something breaks, the day you own it. That's because aviation isn't built around fixing parts after they fail. It's built around replacing them before they're allowed to. It's one of the reasons helicopters are remarkably safe. It's also one of the biggest reasons they're so expensive to own. Take the engine. Most private turbine helicopters have a mandatory overhaul somewhere between 3,500 and 5,000 flight hours. Once that limit arrives, the engine comes out. Even if it's running perfectly, even if your mechanic can't find a single problem, the clock reached zero. One overhaul typically costs between $100,000 and $300,000. Professional operators know that bill is coming from the very first flight, so they spread that cost across every flight hour into what's called an engine reserve. Most first-time owners don't think that way. The helicopter feels brand new, so saving for a bill years away feels unnecessary. Until one day, that six-figure invoice stops being a future problem and becomes today's reality. And surprisingly, the engine isn't even the biggest financial surprise waiting for new owners, because the next bill doesn't wait thousands of flight hours. It shows up every single year, whether you've flown 300 hours or just 3. The bill that surprises most owners isn't fuel, it isn't maintenance, it isn't even that six-figure engine overhaul, it's insurance. Because helicopter insurance doesn't work like car insurance, or even airplane insurance. Helicopters operate in one of the riskiest categories of general aviation: a hard landing, a tail strike, a rotor strike. Any one of them can turn a perfectly good helicopter into $1 million insurance claim. Hull insurance alone typically costs between 4 and 10% of the helicopter's value every single year. Not once, every year. Own a $1.5 million helicopter, and you're looking at somewhere between $60,000 and $150,000 a year. Just to insure the aircraft itself, a similarly valued airplane often costs just 1 to 3% of its value to insure, because helicopters crash and total out far more often than airplanes do. A mistake that might dent a plane can total a helicopter. Then comes the hangar. Leaving a helicopter outside accelerates corrosion, damages expensive components, and can even violate your insurance policy. So most owners rent hangar space. Depending on the airport, that typically costs anywhere from $850 a year. The average corporate helicopter pilot in the US earns just over $113,000 a year. You've hired a full-time professional to operate an asset that might spend more days parked than flying. Now let's put all of those numbers together. Take a fairly typical private owner flying around 300 hours every year. Fuel, oil, routine maintenance. Those variable costs total roughly $185,000 annually. Now add the bills that arrive whether the helicopter flies or sits. Insurance, hangar, engine reserve, financing. Together, they add another $315,000 every year. That's a total annual ownership cost of about $500,000. Divide that by 300 flight hours, and each hour in the air costs roughly $1,669. Nearly two-thirds of that annual bill exists before the helicopter even leaves the ground. The helicopter isn't expensive because you fly it. It's expensive because you own it, which leads to an obvious question. If ownership costs nearly $1,700 an hour, why not simply charter one? After all, the charter company already owns the helicopter. They already pay the insurance. They already hire the pilot. Surely their hourly rate must be even higher. Surprisingly, it isn't. A Robinson Air 44, a smaller helicopter one class below the turbine aircraft we've been discussing, can often be chartered for around $549 an hour. Turbine charter runs higher still, but even using that lower figure as a conservative comparison, owning your own turbine helicopter at $1,669 an hour still costs roughly 3 times as much. And you avoid every ownership headache: no insurance renewal, no overhaul reserve, no hangar rent, no pilot salary. You simply pay for the trip and walk away. Ownership only begins to make financial sense when the helicopter flies almost every day, the kind of utilization you'd expect from a commercial operator, not a private owner. So if the economics clearly favor chartering, why do wealthy buyers still keep signing purchase agreements? There are really only 2 reasons. The first is business. Executives visiting multiple sites a week can turn saved hours into real revenue. For them, the helicopter isn't replacing a car. It's replacing lost time. The second reason is taxes. Under the 2025 One Big Beautiful Bill Act, qualifying aircraft placed into business service are eligible for 100% bonus depreciation. Instead of spreading the deduction over many years, a qualifying business can deduct the entire purchase price in year 1. Industry tax guides run this example on a $10 million jet, roughly $3.7 million in first-year tax savings for a buyer in the top bracket. Apply that same rate to a $1.5 million helicopter, and the first-year deduction can be worth well over $500,000. Suddenly, the helicopter doesn't need to earn that money back. The tax code already recovered a large part of the purchase price. Of course, there's a catch. The aircraft has to qualify for legitimate business use. This isn't a loophole for weekend trips to the lake. For buyers who structure it correctly, the government is effectively subsidizing part of the aircraft. For everyone else, it's simply a very expensive machine. And if you think fixed costs only hurt private owners, history tells a bigger story. One of the clearest examples is PHI Inc. For decades, PHI operated one of the largest helicopter fleets in America. More than 240 helicopters, many of them ferrying workers to offshore oil platforms across the Gulf of Mexico. The model looked simple: keep the helicopters flying, spread enormous fixed costs across enough billable hours. It worked until oil prices collapsed. Flying hours disappeared, but the debt didn't, the insurance didn't, the hangars didn't. With roughly $500 million in debt approaching maturity, PHI filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in March 2019. The helicopters hadn't become less reliable. The demand underneath the business had simply disappeared. Private ownership follows the exact same economics, just on a smaller scale. Your insurer doesn't ask how many trips you canceled this month. Your hangar doesn't charge less because business slowed down. Every major expense continues, whether the helicopter flies or not. So, does owning a private helicopter ever make financial sense? Yes, but only for a surprisingly small group of people. If you're running a charter operation, or a business that genuinely flies enough hours to spread those fixed costs, ownership can work. But for the person buying a helicopter simply to skip traffic or enjoy the status of ownership, the numbers tell a different story. The insurance, the hangar, the engine reserve, the pilot. None of those costs shrink just because you flew less than you expected. Chartering gives you nearly all the convenience without carrying any of the fixed costs. Which brings us back to where we started. A helicopter really can take you from downtown traffic to your lake house in 20 minutes. That promise is completely real, But you're not paying $1.5 million for 20-minute flights. You're committing to roughly $500,000 every year, whether you fly 3 times or 300. Because the rotor blades were never the expensive part. The business underneath them was